You're listening to Forge Theater Labs,
a podcast devoted to exploring theater history.
Where does that idea come from?
concepts in storytelling.
Is anything that original?
Isn't that just an assumption?
And the creation of theater from behind the scenes.
How do they even do that?
This is Forge Theater Labs.
History, innovation, perspective.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Josh N Hsu, and this is Forge Theater Labs. Tonight's conversation is about building a theater company that lasts, not through scale or spectacle, but through consistency, relationships, artistic trust, and a deep belief in local artists. For more than 2 decades, Good Theater has occupied a singular place in Maine's cultural ecosystem. Founded in 2002, the company became one of the state's most significant employers of Maine-based theater artists while cultivating a fiercely loyal audience for work that is entertaining, actor-centered, and deeply human. Tonight, we're joined by 2 incredible people who have shaped both the artistic identity and the future of the company. Brian Allen is the co-founder and artistic director of Good Theater and has directed over 100 productions for the company. A Maine native with more than 4 decades in professional theater, Brian has also directed over 200 productions for organizations, including Portland Symphony Orchestra, Theater at Monmouth, and Portland Players, and directed the off-Broadway run and national tour of the original Broadway musical Radical Radio. In addition to his directing work, he has performed extensively, taught classes on musical theater history, and consulted with nonprofit organizations and individuals navigating creative transition and growth. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thrilled to have you. And alongside him is Gusta Johnson, Executive Director of Good Theater at Stevens Square, a performer, administrator, and arts leader whose background spans acting, singing, improvisation, marketing, and organizational strategy. Her performance credits include productions at Good Theater, such as Lend Me a Soprano, Desperate Measures, Lucky Stiff, and numerous Broadway concert performances, alongside work with Mad Horse Theater Company and theaters across Maine, New York, Seattle. She's worked extensively at Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in New York and toured nationally with her improv group, Wicked City. Offstage, Gusta oversees Good Theater's operations, development, marketing, and strategic growth, and previously served as the Director of Marketing and Communications for the Portland Symphony Orchestra. She holds an MBA with distinction from the University of Glasgow. And now, after more than 2 decades on Munjoy Hill, Good Theater has entered a new chapter at Stevens Square, with her at the helm. Welcome, Gusta.
Thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate the intro. Very, very, very kind. Very kind.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so thrilled to have you both. As I was talking about, Good Theater has entered this new chapter at Stevens Square, a move that feels both logistical, philosophical, a reinvention of space and your relationship with an audience, if not institutional identity, and the possibilities that it brings to Portland. I'm thrilled tonight that we're going to talk about how your theater company has survived long enough to evolve. And we'll talk about artistic leadership, executive leadership, a little bit about fundraising and rehearsal rooms, and about maintaining optimism, which I think is a core characteristic of the Good Theater in difficult times. And so I thought I'd kick it off with a nice little icebreaker. Brian, I'm going to start with you first. After directing more than 100 productions for Good Theater, what qualities make you say, that's a Good Theater show?
It has to be a good story. It has to appeal to me, because if I'm going to spend weeks and weeks with a show, it has to be something I like and that I want to see over and over and over again. And, after all these years and all these shows, I think I have a pretty good sense of what Good Theater audiences like. And so it has to fit those criteria. It basically has to be a piece of Good Theater to qualify to be performed at Good Theater.
Absolutely. And, there is this sort of internal joy that I find that is true of every Good Theater production. There is this brightness. There is this clear enthusiasm on part of the performers, on the audience. And I think that is something that I think is present within your space whenever I step in. And so I thought I'd turn it over to you, Gusta, with a different icebreaker, which is when you walk into a theater space, what's the thing that you think of that makes it feel immediately alive?
The ghosts. No.
Ghosts. There have been many theaters that I've walked in where I'm like, that's a ghost.
Yeah. You know, every theater space is different, and I've been to, like, so many in my life, but they all have something similar, which is just this sort of, like, magic to it, and I can't describe it fully, but it does feel like spirits. It, like, feels like spirits of collaboration and the spirits of, like, art and people getting together doing this crazy thing called theater, and it influences a room, and I can even feel it in our new home, how the energy is shifting the more shows we do.
Talk a little bit about that. Like, in what ways has it transformed in your mind?
I think it's just like I feel this sound makes me sound so woo-wooey, and I'm not, but, like, I feel like it's welcomed us more. Like, with every show we do, with the response that we have with the audience, with us getting a ghost light, I'm a little superstitious about those things, as Brian knows. It's like the theater itself has started to welcome us more, and it might be, no offense to the nuns, but it might be that we're, reassuring them if there are any spirits there. So
I think you're absolutely right. I agree that every show it gets a little warmer. And some
Mhm.
of that, I think, our audience has attended for 21 years at a theater that was pretty unique. I mean, it only had 100 seats. We were generally pretty full, and people had a rhythm there. So they were acquainted with it. They felt comfortable in that space. And I think they're becoming more and more comfortable at our new space, but it is different. It was like going on a blind date and, do I like this person or don't I like this person? And they've discovered they really like this person and they're having a good time.
Uh,
and wait
I
till we get cookies.
I
Oh,
know.
cookies. Oh, yeah, I'm
And
there for that.
wine,
Yeah.
and
And
wine.
wine, absolutely. I wanna take it back for a moment because, that is a sort of core characteristic of good theater, how loyal your audiences have been over the, however many years since you started. And so I wanna sort of take it back to, 2001, 2002. You're about to start the good theater, Brian. What did you feel was missing in the theatrical landscape that felt like, "You know what? I think here's a place where good theater can fill that space."
Oh, it was nothing like that. It was a conversation that was held in the lobby of the St. Lawrence during the second week of the show that we were doing in November of 2001. And they said, "How would you guys like to be our theater in residence?" And Steve and I just looked at each other and we looked back at them and said, "Okay, that sounds like a good idea." There was no plan. There was no thought about that. It was the furthest thing from our minds. And then the opportunity presented itself and we said yes. And that's generally been how good theater has succeeded, is that we've never had a plan. And this new space, we thought we were done. And then the new space, somebody called us and said, "How would you like to have the space?" And we said yes. And so that's how it's always been. So, the theater is art. And so I don't necessarily think of things that are lacking that are out there. It's just that there's room for more creativity. And I don't think of it as competition. If people have a good time at our theater, well, maybe they'll go have a good time at Out There, or maybe they'll have a good time at Portland Stage or Portland Players. It's like we all need to get these people in the door. We're all doing something a little bit different. And so it's like, which restaurant do you want to go to tonight? Well, I feel like seafood, so I'm going to go see Big Fish at Portland Players or whatever the case may be. So
I love that idea of, pardon the term, like a gateway drug, right? Like we see one production and
absolutely.
suddenly it opens the door to something else, even if that production is Cats. Back when you're 12 and watching it, that was my entryway, and
Right.
that was a door that unfortunately, like I don't want that to be my entrance to theater, but it was, and it was this magical moment for me where I went, I want to actually participate in this world.
And
Um,
not to
Sort of a side,
defend
yeah,
Cats,
go
but
side,
Cats the Jellicle Ball won the Tony Award for Best
Mhm.
Revival
yeah.
last night, and they've completely reinvented it for a queer community and to celebrate the art of ballroom. And it's like, that's pretty cool. I didn't think I'd go see Cats again, but maybe I will now,
Just for the record, Brian is defending Cats.
Does that include the movie version? I just want to make
No. Oh my
so while we're
God.
sidebarring here, apologies, but I think that's so fascinating. I want to take it back to so you did that one show. You're
Yes.
invited into that space.
And it was a crazy time because I was working at the symphony and Steve was doing some freelance gigs, and he had a gap in his schedule that matched a gap in my schedule. And he said, there's a new theater space opening up on Munjoy Hill. There's an opening in November. We're both free. Would you direct a play? I want to be in a play. We'll produce it. I said, sure. We started moving forward with that. And then 9/11 happened. And it was like, well, do we continue? Is theater going to continue? What's going on? And we decided to. And, we had picked this play, Over the River and Through the Woods, which was about family. It was about food. It was about grandparents and grandchildren. And it was super funny and it was so touching. And it's exactly what people needed to experience at that time. So again, good theater was in the right place at the right time. And we weren't even good theater at that point. We were just Steve and Brian putting on a show. And they asked us, and we said, okay. And then we scrambled to become incorporated to get our nonprofit status. And we opened our first full season in the fall. And I was very deliberate about the 4 shows that we picked because we had never done this before. And I thought, okay, we have to be somewhat manageable with it. So when I was in college, I was in a production of Charlie's Aunt, and it had been a great experience. And so I thought, well, I'll open with that. And it got a rave review in the Portland Press Herald, and we were kind of off. And then we brought back Over the River and Through the Woods because we knew how to do that one. And then I had been a big fan of the musical Little Me forever. And it's a musical that a lot of people don't know. It's usually done on a huge scale with a large cast. And I had this idea that we could do it with 10 people. And it was a great vehicle for Steve. And that show is the show that really put us on the map because people were like, what is this show? And it was super fun. And we had such a good time. And that sort of really launched it. And then we closed the season with Shirley Valentine, which I had directed 10 years prior at the Theater Project in Brunswick. And I used the same actress and we did the show together again. And so I had 2 shows that I had done before, and I had a show that I knew from having done in college, and then I had one, brand new show, and I directed all of them, and our tickets were $10, and you could buy a subscription for $30. So you could see those 4 shows for $7.50 a piece back in 2002. And that was how we began. And then it was successful. And so there was a second season and a third season. And Steve and I thought, well, we'd be lucky if we could start paying ourselves at season 5. And we were actually able to do that at season 3. And then we were celebrating our 5th anniversary and then our 10th anniversary. And then, oh my God, it's going to be our 20th anniversary. And then we lost our lease. And so we thought we were retiring. And then we got a new lease on everything by going to Stephen Square. And that's after we had decided that that was going to be the future. I called Gusta. She was still living in London. And I said, do you have a job yet?
And so I'm going to take it over. I'm going to turn it over to Gus at this point. So here we are, right? Brian calls you up. You're living in London at the time. And walk us through that conversation and where you were at that point in your life.
Oh, wow. Great question. Brian and I have been chatting about it for a while, and we had, I remember being over there and the sadness of realizing that good theater was losing its lease, because we talked every couple weeks, right, Brian? On WhatsApp and Zoom and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we would catch up and gossip, and I would share the crazy stuff that was happening, and all that stuff. And then once in a while, bore him with British politics, which I barely understood. And I remember being so devastated because I realized that good theater, you talk about it differentiating itself in the marketplace. all that MBA talk. But really what it does is it is the largest employer of Maine-based theater artists. And so I knew that economically for the artists in Portland, it was going to be devastating. And then I remember him telling me about this, and we'd have these conversations that would evolve, and it got more and more hopeful. And, there was always the part of me that like, I think I'm a nice mix of, I love the cat's appearance. That's perfect timing. Um, I'm a I would say a good mix of pessimist and optimistic, and I think Brian is more optimistic, and I think that's the way that it should work with an executive director and an artistic director. But exactly. So I think we pair off quite well.
We do.
We do, and I'm very grateful for that. But I remember him saying, I think it's a done deal. And I remember writing a note to Nathan while we were chatting and just holding it up to him and being like, it's a done deal. And I was like, I think I gotta go back to Maine. He was in RADA in London, and so was like halfway through, and I was like, I gotta take Finn back. We gotta go. And I had been applying for jobs like in London, and I had been applying to jobs in Maine and everything. But when Brian called, I was like, yeah, this is my dream. This is my dream come true. So there was no doubt in my mind. So.
And for those listeners who are listening, if you're wondering who Nathan was, Nathan just actually showed up on our last episode on our director's roundtable. And so you can catch him there. And that is Gusta's significant other. And we appreciate Nathan coming on to talk about that. Well, thank you for all of that context. Obviously, how did sort of Maine-based performers become such a sort of central part of it? Because as I know, like you do bring in guest artists, outside artists from Broadway that I think is a welcome relief to Maine, but also, how have you developed this network, sustained this network over time?
I just always believe that people need to be treated fairly and they need to be paid for their time. So we started off the bat paying actors right from the very beginning. And I've always tried to pay at least more than minimum wage as we have gone through. And we've been able to do that. And going to Stevens Square, we gave actors a raise that we hadn't been able to do for a few years because with only 100 seats at our former location, there was just no growth available in terms of the budget. And now we have that opportunity. And, the first thing we did was to reward the people who are the ones that the audience sees. They see Gusta and myself at curtain speeches, but otherwise it's the actors who captivate them and encourage them to come back again and whatnot. And I always feel that needs to be rewarded. And I think I brought more people in the early days of the organization as we were growing. And I always thought it was like a wonderful opportunity to have Broadway veterans come in and work with local people. And I remember Alma Cuervo was here and we were doing the play 4,000 Miles. And Alma's done like 13 or 14 Broadway shows. She was in the same class as Meryl Streep and Wendy Wasserstein and Sigourney Weaver at Yale. And at the end of the run, she said to me, "This is like one of the best experiences I've ever had." And the other people that I've been on stage with could walk into any rehearsal room or any audition room in New York and not be anything other than welcomed. And when I went to see her in her next Broadway show, it said favorite regional theaters, the Alley Theater in Houston and Good Theater in Portland, Maine. And, she has a bazillion theaters that she could put in her bio, and she chose those two. And I think that's like really significant. So
I think that's such a wonderful, characteristic of good theater that every actor that I know that has worked at good theater has had positive things to say about that experience and that level of professionalism and, the variety of people that come in. I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about moving into that new space and that process of that new space. But I thought before we sort of take our break, musical you will defend forever. No matter what it is, what is your favorite musical? And we'll start with you, Gusta. What's a musical you will defend forever, even though perhaps Not anybody else will.
No, I want Brian to go first.
Well, I think the musical that I would defend forever probably is Sideshow. I've directed it twice, and I know it has some flaws, but that score and how people feel, it's amazing. And I think my favorite musical has probably mostly been A Chorus Line. That was the one that really did it for me early on. But I've come to appreciate so many, and it's kind of like children. It's hard to say which one is really your favorite.
Mhm.
Of course. Gusta?
Mine is Cats. I'm joking. Uh, I will defend. I love a lot of musicals. I don't feel like I have to defend a lot of them. Brian and I differ a little bit. We both like Lin-Manuel Miranda, but I think I like Hamilton a bit more than he does, and so I will defend that. But he loves In the Heights, and
I do too.
it's such a good musical, and I will defend the concept album that they released. So they're developing into a musical, Warriors, which I thoroughly loved listening to, and I'm excited to see what they do with. So
Absolutely. One really old classic one that I think is so absurd, so ridiculous, and I don't know why it lives in my brain so much as it does, which is The Adventures of Superman. The original.
Ooh.
It's a
Oh.
terrible musical. It's a bad plot, but it's just so charming at the end of the day. And there's just something that is nostalgic about it that brings charm to my heart. Every
You've
time
Got Possibilities is a favorite theater song of mine from that
Yeah,
score.
absolutely.
Sung by Linda Lavin of Portland, Maine.
Oh, no way.
Ooh.
Fantastic.
Yes,
Fun
and
fact.
and it was an early Harold Prince musical where she forged her relationship with him, and they would do several shows together going forward, including Hollywood Arms, that was written by Carol Burnett's daughter. And I was doing a little night music at the Portland Symphony, and Linda Lavin's sister was playing Madame Armfelt, Jocelyn Pollard. And Hal Prince gave Linda the night off so she could fly from Chicago to Portland to see our production. And he sent a note to us saying, "Have a great opening for a little night music." So that was, there's a little story for you.
And thank you for that theater history. That's clearly the reason I moved to Portland, Maine. In any case, we'll be right back. You've been listening to Forge Theater Labs.
Ways of experiencing performance. We're proud to share that Forge Theater Labs is now a sponsored project of Fractured Atlas, which means your donations are tax deductible and directly support the creation of this podcast, live tapings, and artist-driven projects. If our work has inspired you, made you think, or brought you closer to the theater community, we invite you to help keep it going. You can make a donation by visiting forgetheaterlabs.com for our link to our Fractured Atlas page. Every contribution, big or small, helps us forge new pathways for artists and audiences alike. Thank you for being part of our community.
Welcome back. I'm Josh Hsu, and this is Forge Theater Labs, and we're talking to Brian Allen and Gusta Johnson from Good Theater. In our last segment, we focused a little bit upon the history of how they got to where they were, how they ended up moving into Stephen Square and building a new home there. And I think for us, as listeners, the move to Stephen Square for Good Theater was more than a venue change. It required fundraising, renovation, institutional reinvention, and the challenge of bringing audiences that already existed into an entirely new chapter of a company's life. And so I'm really excited to explore from a lab perspective what actually was demanded behind the scenes. And so I thought I'd sort of kick it off for both of you. Obviously, we know that once the Hill Arts space, once you were departing the Hill Arts space, you were going to be moving into a new space. You landed on the Stephen Square. And so at what point did the move stop feeling theoretical and became really actual? You said previously that the deal was done. So walk me through a little of how did you get to the point where the deal was done, Brian?
I think the deal was basically done by almost the time that we were actually out of the St. Lawrence. I think we were done at the St. Lawrence around the 30th of March, and I think it was early April when we had a done deal. We hadn't signed a contract yet, but we were pursuing that, and they were drafting the legal paperwork and things. And then we started doing the fundraising pretty much in earnest in July, which is when Gusta started toward the end of July. And one of the first things we did was we had a party here at our house for some donors that we had targeted, people who had been long-term supporters, and kind of explaining what we were going to do. And then we did a big open house in October where we just invited people to come, and we gave them a tour of the space in the state that it was in. And then in January, we began the renovations, and then we opened at the very end of April with our first gala, and then we had our first summer season, and then we opened our first full season in October of 2025.
Incredible. I mean, it seems like all of that happened so quickly, and I can't imagine the work that was required both emotionally and practically in the background. So I thought I want to kick it over to you, Gusta. What surprised you most, or like what takeaways did you have leading through this capital transition? Like what were the kinds of conversations that you found were the most surprising, the most beneficial to sort of guide donors and audiences to get to this new space?
Oh, that's a great question. So, sorry, can you restate that a little bit? I apologize. So you're kind of looking for what are the key takeaways from the transition, the learnings that we happen to have? Because it was
Yeah.
a little bit of a multi-part question, so I want to make
Yes,
sure I
absolutely.
capture both.
Yeah. So like what were the sort of things that you sort of captured from your donors? Like what was the things that surprised you most, or what were the key takeaways?
Yeah, the things that I would say with the transition in general, what surprised me the most is like, I started in July of 2024, and I had worked with Good Theater as a performer. And I had worked at a cultural nonprofit with PSO, with the Portland Symphony Orchestra, excuse me. But I was starting and we were like hitting the ground running. We did a press conference in mid-August. I remember prepping those materials. I remember doing like pricing analysis and competitive analysis of other spaces in the area while I was still in London. So it was hitting the ground running and learning my job with the patient tutelage of Brian very, very quickly while we're doing a capital campaign and, a pseudo capital campaign in that transition. And that the sort of big takeaways for me was, one, Brian's relationship and Good Theater's relationship with their patrons is incredibly close. And that was such a huge benefit. This was an incredible move. Um, but I think Good Theater is uniquely positioned. We have incredibly loyal patrons, and that made asking for help at that time a lot easier. And I think that Brian is not one to, constantly push a hard ask. And that helped in those moments where it was like, okay, this is a time of incredible expansion and growth. And he had cultivated this relationship with these people over 2 decades. And that's just kind of like, they're like family at this point, and Good Theater needs their help. So they stand up. So that was a big takeaway, was just those relationships, those soft asks, the patient work of what Brian did. I also think it's interesting because you see other theaters like regionally, so other theaters regionally and also nationally, you often don't see the artistic director there all the time. You don't see them at the curtain speech. You don't see them shaking hands with folks after, every show. That is incredibly invaluable for Good Theater because it's part of the reason that we were able to raise that money, and that we're still able to raise money because we're constantly talking to patrons. We're constantly getting that feedback. And then the other thing is, this was a massive renovation. It took the whole team. It took incredibly long hours. And one of the big takeaways is you gotta like each other. You gotta like each other when you're doing this. This is a huge undertaking. And I think Brian and I learned very quickly that we had worked together in the past, but that we worked very, very well together, because I brought this sort of he said, they didn't have a plan. And then he brought in this type A uptight gal who likes a plan. And so together we created this, and he was great because he kind of would let me make infrastructure, and he wasn't precious about we had to invent so much. We had to make a subtenant lease that I, cobbled together and then had a lawyer look at, scream at me, and then reshape. So we've had to learn all these things on the fly. You got to like each other when you're doing that.
Absolutely. I remember coming in October before you had sort of fully renovated the space, and imagining sort of the renovations that you had in mind and getting to see that sort of come to life over time. Walk us through, as a listener, what was that original space like? And what were the substantive changes that you had to make? I mean, just sort of guide us through that. Brian, if you could walk us through
it was not a comfortable space, and the sight lines were bad. The acoustics were terrible. It was painted like a dingy off-white. The thrust on the stage was 5 feet bigger than what we had, and the stage was 1.5 feet higher than what we had. So it had this very oppressive nature to it. You could sort of picture the nuns standing there, "You will not," or what have you. It was just not welcoming.
And for context, beforehand, it was an educational space, right?
It was the auditorium of a Catholic girls' school.
Great.
And it had been that for years. I mean, that particular part of the building was built in 1970, and it was, a cinder block building. It had pretty comfortable seats. That was a plus. The carpeting was in decent shape. And then, the actual stage was okay. It just needed to be made smaller. The thrust needed to be cut back. And, Steve, my husband and co-founder, he really took the lead with that. And he was an engineering major, and he's really good with spatial stuff. And he, went to bat for things because the building was originally purchased with historic tax credits. So there were certain things you could do and certain things you couldn't do. And then some things you had to get permission in order to do. And Steve fought that fight so admirably and made all these incredible changes to the building. And as I said, when you saw it in October, we had done nothing. And then in January, we started doing the stuff, and it went very quickly. And when we had a bunch of great people like Lilias White and Andrea McCardle and Julie Benko, these big Broadway stars, Tony Award winners, who walk in and look around and they're like, this is a nice place. They're really loving the quality of the space and how it feels so intimate. And the audience is never very far away. So it's just really become an exceptional space. But it was sad, I think, is the word I would use to describe it before. Sad.
Understandably.
Yes.
Gusta, so if I remember correctly, you put in some sound dampening. You put in curtains to sort of navigate and sort of create the space for the audience so that it could be expandable and retractable depending on your size of audience. Is that correct?
Yes, and I did all of that. No, I'm joking. Yeah. Steve really led that, and then we had the acoustic, sort of assessment, because when we were actually practicing for our, what was that? That was an open house or something we were singing. Oh yeah. The open house in the lobby.
Right.
Of the seas. And I remember singing an aria because Brian wanted to re-traumatize me with my opera training. And
That's what
and I
friends
remember
are for.
Exactly. So we were in the space and I sang it and I was like, good God, the acoustics are so live. You can't have more than one person talking at a time or singing, and it's just a cacophonous, impact. So the acoustics were completely redone. We have sound clouds above the stage, which also helps improve and hide the popcorn ceilings, which we need to preserve. And the 56 acoustic panels. We have this amazing curtaining system that you mentioned that allows us to essentially create all these different seating configurations. One that's like 200, 30-ish seats, and then we have these panels so you can close it in even more to like 100 and 175, and that allows us to attract other nonprofits and organizations that maybe like 475 is too many for us, but we want to do a book talk for 100, and we can make that space very intimate. So it's an incredible space now, and every single day I'm there all the time. And Michael, our director of audience services, we're constantly showing the space off, and the reaction that we get every single time is, "Oh my God! Like I didn't even know this was here. My God, this is gorgeous."
I love that you sort of position not only as yourself as a theater, but as a hub, a cultural hub for other nonprofits, book tours, other cultural events to be there. As you sort of expand that discussion, what kind of responsibility comes with that, right? Because that can open you up to criticism, that can open you up to other conversations. Like, how does that sort of like when you're booking someone inside that space, obviously there's the practical of like, yes, we need to make the rent, but what conversations come with that?
Well, I would say, I think it's not a burden, it's an incredible opportunity. Like, this is a absolutely gorgeous space that can be retrofitted and suited to a lot of different needs, both like as a theater and acoustically. And, like Brian mentioned earlier, like the economy, the world right now, like it's hard. It's hard living, prices are going up, things are just challenging. Cultural institutions need to help each other out. What we do is so vital to the community and so just important for our souls. And so I really believe in a rising tide lifts all boats. And so we are dedicated to helping these other organizations out by, essentially on some levels subsidizing certain bookings, because we believe in what they're doing. We want to help each other out because it's so freaking important right now. And we only benefit from allowing the space to be a home to multiple organizations. And we have worked with dozens now of nonprofits and corporate bookings. And I'm so proud of what we've built. And it's great to see in the second year that a lot of folks are coming back. So it speaks to our relationships with them, our belief in them, our ability to help. We've worked with Portland Ballet, Opera Maine, the Portland Chamber Music Festival. They're coming back in August. Check them out. They're incredible. We've worked with Partners for World Health, Maine Biz, for 2 years running, and they've just rebooked for a third. We have, an HR conference. By the way, HR people are the most well-behaved people you will ever have at a space. We've worked with candlelight concerts. We've worked with who else, Brian? My goodness.
The Playwrights Festival was just in.
They were incredible. They were incredible.
They were wonderful.
It was such a delight to be able to open this home to other cultural organizations.
Fantastic. I mean, imagine yourself 5 years from now, Brian. What kind of cultural space do you imagine you'll continue to be, that you hope can even be bigger? Like, is there any vision in your mind of what that might look like as you start to grow and become even more comfortable in this space?
I definitely see the opportunity for good theater to expand its audience base. The seats are there, and it's just a matter of attracting the audiences. And, the audiences are out there. We just need to find them, and we need to get them through our door once, and then I think they'll be back. And the new space has allowed us to program a little bit differently, that's very exciting. And I want to just continue to partner with wonderful organizations like the Portland Chamber Music Festival and the Portland Playwrights Festival. They've both been such amazing tenants, and it would be nice to have a half a dozen people who call that space home. We're the ones in charge, but every year you're going to see the Portland Chamber of Music Festival in for these 2 weeks in August, and every year you're going to see the Portland Playwrights Festival in for this week in May. And to have a few of those organizations who, you just know that this is where they're going to be at that time of year. And I think we're going to achieve that.
Incredible, incredible. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to talk about sort of the current season, the coming season, and the future of good theater when we come back. This is Forge Theater Labs, and we'll be right back. Want to get your brand in front of a passionate, creative, and engaged audience? Forge Theater Labs is looking for partners to sponsor this podcast and join us in bringing bold, innovative theater to life. If you'd like to place an ad right here, reach out to us at marketing@forgetheaterlabs.com. It's a simple, powerful way to support the arts while sharing your message with listeners who care about creativity and community. Again, that's marketing@forgetheaterlabs.com. Let's build something extraordinary together. Welcome back to Forge Theater Labs. I'm Josh N Hsu, and we're talking to Gusta Johnson and Brian Allen of Good Theater. Welcome back. And, in our last two segments, we focused a little bit on the history of good theater, your transition to Stevens Square. And I thought what we'd do is talk about the current season of good theater and future. And so this season, Brian, you did Little Shop of Horrors, Conversations with Mother, An Old-Fashioned Family Mother, Ken Ludwig's...
Murder. An old-fashioned family murder.
Murder, excuse me. Ken Ludwig's Dear Jack, Dear Louise, Is He Dead? And the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, which is a personal favorite of mine. How did that sort of shaping of that season come about? That's one of my favorite questions, so I'm always going to start there.
When I'm putting together a season, I usually pick an anchor show and then I build the season around it. And this year's anchor show was actually Conversations with Mother. I had read the script. I got an early copy of it because of David Bass Clark, who works with us. And I just knew immediately we had to do it. And thanks to David and our long history at Good Theater of doing quality work, we signed the first contract for the first regional production of that show. So I knew when I wanted to do that show, which was November. And then I started to put things around it. And Gusta and I talked a lot about ideas and things that I was thinking about. And Is He Dead has been on my radar for a long time. There have been a couple of productions of it in Maine, but not for a long time and never in Portland. And that seemed like just a great show to do. There was another musical that we were trying to get, and it was not available to us. And I have always wanted to do Little Shop of Horrors, and it was like, well, can we afford it? The plant's expensive and stuff. And we could afford it, and we decided we just wanted to go with it. And that seemed like such a great way to open. And then as a special event, we're bringing back Dracula, a comedy of terrors, and it seemed like a really fun 1-2 punch. We've got 3 weeks of Little Shop as the first 3 weeks in October, and then in the fourth week, we've got a week of Dracula. So we are taking care of Halloween like nobody's business. and then we have this really heartwarming play and very funny play in November that is, again, about family. And it's such a good time to do a show like that. And then I read An Old-Fashioned Family Murder, and I knew immediately that it was a great show for us, and we got the rights right away. And then when I was reading it again for auditions, I had this idea that basically the cast of last year's Lend Me a Soprano would be perfect in this. And so we did a read-through at our house a few weeks ago, and everybody was dynamite. And so we're going to have a show that we did last year and take 5 of the cast members from it and put them into this show. And I think it's going to be a blast. And it just feels like a really fun way to kick the new year off with a farcical murder mystery. And then Dear Jack, Dear Louise was just a piece that I happened to read on a lark, and it's so beautiful, and it's so funny, and so touching. And we had done a bunch of cabaret shows this year, and they didn't sell very well, and so we decided to do a 6th production instead. And I thought, how lovely to do this gorgeous love story over the first 2 weeks of February, culminating in the February 14th performance. So that just seemed really smart. And then we wanted to laugh in March, and Is He Dead fell in there. And then we were, thinking about musicals, and we decided Spelling Bee would just be the perfect one. And it's nice, both of our musicals are still running off Broadway. They're both in hit revival productions, and so there's a lot of press about them. And it's been quite a while since anyone locally has done either one of those shows, and I'm really looking forward to them. I'm not directing Spelling Bee, Adam Blaze is, but I'm super excited about Little Shop.
Brian, you've directed so much for good theater over the years. How's your relationship as you've become sort of more into this sort of artistic role shifted with your relationship to directing? Like, obviously, you still direct quite a bit. Yeah, but how has that sort of evolved for yourself?
I like it. I mean, we've always had guest directors from time to time. It's just we've been doing it a long time, and I'm a member of the Directors Union. And before I was 65, I needed to do a certain number of contracts in order to get my health insurance. And now that I have Medicaid, I don't have to do as many of those. So the desire is still there, but the need isn't quite as strong as it was before. And so I think it's fun. Adam Blaze is a new director to us. I've seen his work in a few places, and that is exciting that he's getting to take a shot at a show. And Nathan did 2 shows for us. Nathan Gregory did 2 shows for us last year, and they both did really, really well. And so he's tackling Is He Dead, which I think will be a great, he's got an unbelievable cast for that show. I sent the cast list to somebody, and they were like, wow, that's a lot of heavy hitters. So that's like really exciting to me that, it's a chance for really talented people to get together and play. And then Steve, my partner, is directing Dear Jack, Dear Louise. And Steve has done a bunch of 2-character shows for us over the years, and they've always been big hits. He directed Nathan and in Popcorn Falls, and he directed the guys when we did Stones in His Pockets and Mrs. Mannerly. He's done a bunch of them, and they've always been just like great, great shows. So it felt like a really good choice for him in the season as well. So.
Well, it sounds like you have a very talented season and a very exciting season. I want to pivot over to you, Gusta, because obviously we've heard about sort of how the artistic elements sort of survive and, how popular these shows are. But from the sort of executive side, how do you evaluate a season selection? Like, what are the thoughts that run through your brain when you say, oh, we're going to do all these shows?
Yeah. Brian is laughing preemptively because he knows my answer. The 2 big things are, can we afford it? That's always going to be the number one. I'm always like, how many people are in this show, Brian? Like, how big is the set? What are the costumes? That's the big thing is affordability. Can we afford to put on this show? And there are some shows that we have in our back pocket that we know that we're working towards in future seasons, but we have to have a runway financially to be able to produce those. The other thing is, I'm always going to think, I'm a marketer at heart. Please forgive me. I know that we're a noxious bunch, but no offense to any other marketers, but, is it going to sell, and so those 2 are on the sort of more business, like corporate side of things. I have to think of those things first because that's my job. But I also think about, when we're looking at a past season and future seasons, feedback, how are patrons reacting when they were walking out of shows this season like Soprano and Grand Horizons and It Should Have Been You and Dracula, and Something Wonderful. All of them had this just glow on their faces, and so that feedback from patrons, it's nice to get good positive critical feedback as well, so I'm always evaluating it from that level. I'm also thinking about, and Brian is thinking the same thing, is who do these shows appeal to? Because we want to appeal to the tried and true, the people, the good theater loyal patron base, but we as a theater must think about the new generations as well. We must try to bring in, that's something that theaters have been struggling with for years now, is audiences are shifting significantly. How do we program a season that appeals across generations? Not every show has to appeal to all generations, but the season should have something for everyone. And that was great about Dracula: Comedy of Terrors last year, was we saw the most like young people we have ever seen there. We did a lot of outreach to the queer community as a member of that community. It was really powerful to see people coming in. We had drag queen influencers coming. We had, kids from UNE and USM, and it was just incredible to see that. And we keep seeing those kids come back, so that's very exciting. So we think about demographics and we think about inclusivity, like I think about like, whose story is being told, and Brian thinks about it artistically and I think about it from the business side, but we both think about that too, is like whose story is being told, because we don't want to just tell one person's perspective. We want multiple generations, multiple, groups of people, marginalized communities, women, for their voices to be heard on good theater stage. Ideally in a show that sells. So.
Of course. And I think, now that you're hosting, broader cultural events as well, you have that ability to also bring in your good audience into, into an audience that perhaps is now exposed to different things.
I have a perfect example of that. The night I went to the Maine Playwrights Festival, there were 4 of our patrons sitting there who had never been before. And they came because it was in our location and they know the space and they feel comfortable. And their comment to me was, we're going to put that on our calendar every year. This was a blast.
Well, Liz, if you're listening to this, congratulations. That's fantastic for you. Liz, we hosted them on our Playdates scripted episode, which was a dating show between playwrights and dramaturgs in promotion of the Maine Playwrights Festival as well. And so I'm sure if she's listening to this, she'll be over the moon.
I adore Liz. I think she's just a badass. Forgive my French. So
French is completely allowed on this show. We're in Maine. We might as well just be French Canadian. I love to see sort of these shows that are a little bit more provocative, like Dracula, Little Shop of Horrors, sort of bringing back that sort of wonderful vibe, while also being nostalgic at the same time. I'm particularly interested in the Spelling Bee. It's a massive cast. It's a large cast. It's a wonderful show. How did that sort of factor into your whole season? Like, how did you end up choosing that?
That was one of those shows that I loved it when I saw it in New York and I wanted to do it. But the national tour came through Merrill Auditorium. And I thought, I guess I better wait. And then USM did it. And then Lyric Theater did it. So I felt like the area had been a little bit saturated with that show. So it just kind of sat. And then we were looking for something that would appeal to a broad audience that might attract some younger people. And Gusta knew it was a show that I liked, and I knew she had actually done the show. And so we talked about it. It was like, should we do this? And it was like, yeah, let's go for it. And quite frankly, I think that having it running off Broadway in such an acclaimed production is good for us. And, more and more, I think things are costing so much that I see people may not be going to New York as often to see shows. And so they're going to be looking to spend their limited entertainment dollars more locally. It was interesting. I noticed like the Ovation season, most of the musicals that they're doing are musicals they've done before, but that were extremely popular. So Hadestown is coming back for them and Jersey Boys is coming back for them. And so people do have the opportunity to see really cool things here right at home, and they don't have to go to Boston
Mhm.
or New York to see them. And I
Mhm.
hope people will feel the same way about our season and our shows.
Uh, I thought I'd ask this because it feels like the spelling bee is such a wonderful way to sort of appeal to broader audiences. If you think back on your history, like were there shows like this that like really captured a broader audience? You mentioned Dracula a little bit. You mentioned spelling bee and the hopes to do so. Like were there any sort of landmark productions that you could say, that was the one that
Oh,
really broadened our
Augusta
audience base?
August Osage County definitely did that. That was huge doing that show, and we did it for 2 seasons in a row, and it was just such a phenomenon in New York, having won the Tony and the Pulitzer and every other award, and it was written about everywhere, and we did it, and I took this huge show, and I just shrunk it down to our little space, and the same thing with The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. People are like, how are you ever going to do that? And it's like, oh, we're going to just do it smaller and all. And then Sheer Madness, when I did Sheer Madness, that brought in a ton of people who had never been to good theater before. We did 2 runs of Sheer Madness, and we ran, I think, the first one for 9 weeks and the second one for 11 weeks. So we did 20 weeks of that show in Portland, and nobody had ever done anything that long before. And it did really, really well in both incarnations. And it was what we needed at the time, and it definitely opened the doors to a lot of people who'd never been in to see a show at good theater before.
Interesting. I love sort of the sort of broad appeal, but bringing it into a small space. I think there's something that invites audiences in when we take these seemingly large shows and put them into intimate spaces, or at least build a connection directly with our audience. Even though we're sort of doing something that's popular on Broadway, like
Right.
bringing it into a tight space inside our community that I think really captures the essence of what good theater does. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Gusta, let's pivot to you for our final thought. What excites you most about the next decade with good theater?
Oh, such a good question. I am so excited to see good theaters audiences grow, to diversify, to see newer generations come in. I was telling Brian the other day, we're like, I'm driving down Stevens Avenue, which is, academic row essentially, and we're seeing like these high schoolers, and it's like, I'm so excited because Portland is also diversifying, and so the level of shows that we can now do for the theater, like the number of people we can invite in, the number of stories we can tell that maybe we couldn't tell in the past. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to continue to make good theater was already an incredibly welcoming space, and to just open the doors wider to as much of the region as possible, to let folks know we're here, to let them know we got cozy seats and great parking and good bathrooms, and that the space is welcoming and is professional and is safe and inclusive. And so I'm so excited about that. I'm so excited to see us continue to shape ourselves as a cultural destination and a cultural hub, to lift up other organizations, to showcase nonprofits that we love and support, and to continue to build this sort of interconnected, network of incredible artists and nonprofits doing great things. The thing about theater I love more than anything is the collaboration. I don't love doing a monologue. I love doing a scene, because there is nothing more magical than building something with other artists. It is the thing, other than giving birth to my son, who is everything and is magic. It is the thing I love the most in this life, is that act of creation together. It is beautiful, and I'm so excited to see good theater continue to be that place.
And on that note, let's call it a night. Thank you to you both for not only sustaining a theater company for more than 2 decades, but for continuing to evolve it and providing us this opportunity as a community to gather.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Have a great night, everyone. This is Forge Theater Labs. We'll catch you next time.
This episode was hosted by Joshua N Hsu with post-production by Sam Rapaport.